This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with an RTX 4080 build, but this time it's going to be Ryzen. It's like the ultimate AMD build, except we're using an NVIDIA GPU. In this video, we'll go through all the components to create your very own RTX 4080 PC. We'll be showing you what's hot, what's not, what needs a little bit of improvement. We'll show you the full build process, and of course, we'll show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you know exactly how this thing performs. So, before I run completely out of breath, let's get started. The three critical components in this build actually comprise of the following: a B650 motherboard, which is the new AMD AM5 platform, but it is the cheapest way of doing it. The RTX 4080, this one is from Zotac, and then of course the all-important brand new CPU from AMD, the Ryzen 7900X. But to be fair, if you did want to go for a 7700X, that's a fair choice, to be honest. It's going to be slightly cheaper, but it won't have so much performance in CPU-bound titles with things like Spider-Man, for instance. Let's start by unboxing our 4080. I've only actually seen the Founders Edition 4080 so far, which is the same size as the 4090. I imagine this is going to be the same, but obviously in the Zotac flavor, and I think that has been confirmed. Look at this. It is ginormous, and the advantage of this is obviously you're going to have much better cooling potential. You can actually overclock this and get even more performance, but then the downside is that you're going to need a very large chassis to actually fit this in, and then obviously you are paying a little bit more money because there's more stuff on this. It's obviously harder to manufacture and you need more stuff to manufacture in the first place. High power consumption. Please only use separate power cables, don't daisy chain, for maximum voltage stability. If we take this sticker off, we can have a look on the top. We've got this button here that's for the dual BIOS, and then we have our 16-pin, 12+4, however you want to describe it. That means you're going to need an adapter to actually get this plugged in, or buy one of the brand new power supplies that has the native PCI Gen 5 cable out of the box and ready to go. Speak of the devil and he shall appear. This is actually a little bit different to the 4091 as it's only 3 rather than 4, which is going to make it a little bit tidier, but obviously it's not the most ideal solution. If you can buy a third-party cable, it's going to make your PC look much, much cleaner. But let's pop Saggy Maggie away for a second, so we can move on with the rest of our build. And this is a brilliant opportunity to actually talk about the platform that we're using, B650. And essentially, if you do want to go for AMD AM5, this is going to be the cheapest way to actually access all of these new CPUs and DDR5. And the main issue really with the Ryzen platform at the moment is that it is very expensive if you want to be able to buy everything. And by going for B650, it is going to mean that you have a little bit less bandwidth, so you're not going to get as many PCIe lanes. And it also means that you aren't going to be able to support the latest things like PCI Generation 5 on both the graphics and the storage, but I don't really think that matters because all you probably care about is gaming frame rates, and this is where this is going to serve the purpose and still allow you to have loads of I/O. This particular motherboard is from Gigabyte Aorus. It's the B650 Aorus Elite AX. AX meaning that it has AX Wi-Fi, which is great if you're wanting to use this with like a super fast router. But the main real difference, if you like, between Intel and AMD when it comes to the platform at the moment, especially if you are looking at a more budget-friendly board, is that the AMD ones tend to go for PCI Generation 5 storage only, whereas Intel tends to go for PCI Gen 5 on the expansion slot, but not on the storage. And I'm not sure which way is going to be better because at the moment you don't need either. You don't need the ridiculously fast SSDs, but there aren't any graphics cards that take advantage of Gen 5 on this slot either. And it's definitely going to be ages before it's going to make any difference to your outright performance when they do land. So I wouldn't worry about these. I would personally go for B650, or if you're looking at an Intel board, probably go for B660, B760. Just make sure you update your BIOS so you can actually support the latest CPUs. But that's the waffly bit anyway. We'll drop this down and we will grab our CPU. This one is from AMD, of course. This is the Ryzen 7900X. This is a 12-core CPU, and they're all like big performance cores rather than Intel, where they sort of go for a mix of efficiency and performance. And they feature this very cool new quirky design that looks nice, but it does mean that thermal paste will go everywhere when you do want to reuse them, but this isn't going to affect most people. And in terms of gaming, this or a Ryzen 7700X is probably going to be your best bet because they have very high clock speeds, very high single core performance, and are just generally brilliant chips for gaming and plenty of creativity on the side too. But we will now open up our LGA slot just by giving it a little raise. Then you can gently grab your chip and just lower it down into place. You do have to be gentle though, arguably more so than you did when the pins were on the CPU. Lower it back down, pin it into place, and remove this little top cover. Then you're ready to install your RAM, and I'm sorry to say we're not going for RGB memory here today, which actually annoys me because I love RGB RAM, but if you don't, you'll probably prefer one of these. This is actually a brand new set from G.Skill. It is their Trident Z5, and this supports AMD Expo memory, so it's very similar to Intel's XMP, but it's open source, I believe, and it does actually work with AMD a lot easier. This is a 6000 megahertz kit, and it's very easy to drop into place. Just obviously make sure you don't drop your RAM on your motherboard, and also make sure that you are going for DDR5 here, because AMD does only support DDR5 on the AM5 platform, which does mean that you get more performance, but it does also mean that you are going to have to go for 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it is going to cost you a little bit more than DDR4 would at the same sort of price point. Same sort of capacity and speed, okay? Then we can move on to the SSD, and we've gone for Gen 4 today. This is one from Viper. It is the VP4300. This is a ridiculously fast SSD. It's got read speeds over 7,000 megabytes a second, which, to be honest, isn't really going to make masses of difference for gaming at the moment. But as you do have direct storage pretty much right around the corner now, I think we will start to see improvements in modern games, especially things like Unreal 5 games. So we'll take this heatsink off, remove the protective padding, grab our Gen 4 SSD, line it up with the slot, push it down with a quick release. Quite a nice little gigabyte feature there, actually. Then we will return the heatsink back on and screw it down. Now, next up, we can move on to our chassis, and this is genuinely one of my favorites, which is why we've used it quite a few times on the channel now. If you're after aesthetics, this has to be pretty much the best combination of timeless style and design, and then actually load of RGB tempered glass goodness. It's from Corsair. This is the 5000X. It's not the absolute cheapest case in the world, but if you're going to fill it with a load of RGB, somehow it manages to look very tasteful every time, and it still maintains very good airflow. I wouldn't necessarily call this particularly unique anymore, but one of the features that I do like is that you have this more traditional sort of layout, but if you remove this section here, you can actually then mount some fans and have air blowing in through the side. And this is what I've actually done with my personal rig. I've got the airflow version of this, and then I've got, well, a custom loop actually, and it's not quite working the way it's supposed to at the moment, but that is actually no fault of the case itself. If you want to see my adventures with hardline liquid cooling in this case, find that video in the top right corner of your screen. But look, we've got doors. You can build and then tidy it very easily. Huh? You get loads of different pieces as well, so if you want to do like a 360 radiator at the front, you'll use this, but I think we're actually pretty much going to leave it in the default state. I mean, I say it's ready to go. The only thing that annoys me a little bit is that they give you 3 fans at the front, and then there's this one missing at the back. I know it would raise the price if they included it, but I mean, come on. If you have to buy it retail anyway, you have a gap. It's a bit annoying. So yeah, if you do buy this case, you're going to need an extra SP120 RGB Elite. We'll start by removing all of the screws from the box in the hard drive cage, and then we'll grab the fan screws, and we will then add our extra fan here at the back. It's a 120 one. If you buy a 140, it will not fit. It is incredibly simple, just 4 screws, and it's safe and secure. Then you can pick up your chassis and lay it down flat, grab your motherboard, get this very large piece at the back, gently drop this down into the hole, and then keeping yours nice and flat down on the desk, just screw it into place with the screw holes around the motherboard. Then I'm going to plug in all of our case connections that come nice and neatly tidied for us at the top. There is also an RGB and fan hub on this, which is pretty cool, especially if you are going to go for like additional Corsair fans, because as I've already done, you can just plug them in here and here, one for the RGB, one for the fan speed, and it makes your life much, much easier. But let's grab all of these cables and undo them. We'll then start plugging them in. We've got USB for the RGB hub down there at the bottom, front panel audio, then you've got your reset switch, power switch, and then your power LEDs. I then think the most fiddly bit of this chassis is trying to plug this USB 3 into the block here, and they do actually give you an adapter if you don't have a right angle, because it just won't really fit in at all. But it's frustrating because trying to actually push this down and then push it in without bending the pins is quite annoying. I wish they would have a better solution really for this. We got there in the end though. Then just one more, this USB-C cable that plugs into this metal connector up here at the top. Oh, and there's also a fan cable for the hub. Just plug this in to the one that says chassis fan. Now we can get to the arguably more fiddly bits, not the power supply, that will come a little bit later, but for our all-in-one liquid. And I'll start by saying that this is one I love. I think it looks absolutely fantastic, but it is going to get very pricey. So if you don't want to have an LCD display on it that actually shows you system vitals or gifts or things, don't worry, you can save like £80 or so by not going for that functionality. And the thing with these new Ryzen chips is that they do run very, very hot. So if you were able to step up to maybe a 280 or 360 rad, that would arguably be better money spent, but your system might not look as good. But let's pop the glass off the top, then remove the dust filter. We can then do ourselves a little test fit so we can work out where everything is going. We'll put it on like that, then carefully remove it, keeping this in the exact same orientation. Then grab yourself a fan and gently put it on so the cables are going out the back and so the direction of the travel is going through the radiator. Because the way we want the whole airflow system to work is cool air in through the front and then hot air to be exhausted out the top and out the back as well. So let's screw these fans into place. Let's grab all of these cables and feed them through the back. Hold this up to the top, somewhere in the middle preferably. Then you can grab a couple screws and just secure this in place. Just hand tighten it for now so you can leave it dropping down a little bit. Then you can get it nice and snug. Then grab the AMD screws, secure these in to the same standoffs. If you're buying this new, it will come with some thermal paste by default, but because I've used this before, I'll need to add my own just into the middle really of the CPU. Then you can pick up the cooler, push this on top so it lines up, grab the 4 thumb screws that come in the box, and then just secure this down. As you've probably noticed, the LCD component actually does detach, so if it falls off, don't worry. It's just a case of lining it back up and pushing it back on top. Then grabbing all of this cable malarkey, feed it through around the side, grab this little dummy fan cable and plug this into the grey CPU fan. Then round the back side, you'll need to grab your little junction box that comes with the cooler. This actually allows you to plug more fans and more RGB and things in, which is great, but we don't need it here today, so it's a little bit unnecessary and overkill, but normally it'd be great. I mean, actually, we could always plug everything into this, because then we only need one SATA, one USB, and it's a smart controller, so it's not gonna just run all of them off of the CPU and ramp them up at the same speed. It's variable, so that's actually probably quite a good idea. Moving on once again, because actually that wasn't too bad and I didn't utter the words "I hate radiators," that seems to be a hobby of mine. We can now move on to the power supply. And I've gone for a reliable one, but definitely one that's going to save you a little bit of money compared to some of the premium brands. This one is from Deepcool, and I believe they actually do make their own power supplies. This isn't like some, knockoff one that you can find for 20 quid. So you're still going to have to pay a fair bit to get this, but for a 1000 watt power supply, these tend to be a very good value, and it is rated as gold for efficiency as well. 1000 watts is slightly overkill really for a 4080, they recommend 750, but if you're going to upgrade to something more beefy later, best to get a better power supply now really. So let's plug in all of our cables. It's a fan facing downwards, just gently slot this in the back. We might need to remove, or at least move this hard drive cage actually. Yeah, that was really easy actually. It's just 2 screws and then the whole thing just slides this way a bit. Screw it down with hex screws. Let's start with our SATA connections for our RGB hub. Then our CPU cables we can just feed in at the top. And then our motherboard ATX we're just pushed through the very large hole. Give the whole thing a spin, then just connect it up. And then, finally, we can grab our RTX 4080 ready to go in our rig. We can even do a little peel bonus, but it should be very easy to install. Just unscrew these through PCIe slot covers from their slots. Save them for later in case you sell the chassis or change GPU. And then you can pick up your big boy and gently line it up. Remove the little plastic cover before doing this, and then you can line it up and just give it a push home. Nice and easy. And that actually perfectly matches the motherboard. That was not planned. It's like it blends in. Look, the grey goes into the GPU. I'm a genius. But make sure you do get it nice and snug with those screws. Pick up your little GPU sag cover that comes in the box. It's not the best system actually, because if you move your case around, that's gonna go. We'll leave it like that for now. Then we go on for drawback number 2, which is this connector. We just plug this in to the graphics card, feed our PCIe cables through, plug them into the adapter. I'm sorry you've got to do this, it's not my fault. But there you go. that I believe is our finished computer. I don't like that this blocks the GeForce RTX logo actually, but if you came through here, the adapter just looks even more ugly. So we're gonna leave it like this for now. But ultimately, how you tidy it is entirely up to you. This honestly was an incredibly easy PC to build. Bear in mind the amount of gubbins we had in here. And as you can clearly see, there is a lot more room for other components if you do want to go with something a bit more high-end, as I say, like a water-cooled build, or maybe just have extra fans for better airflow. It is entirely up to you, but if you want looks and performance, it's a very good case. But will this work? And will the performance of the 4080 be up to snuff? Here we go, moment of truth. Let's do it. Let's do it. Ah, has the power switch come out again? Maybe? Was that it? Yes, it was. Fans are spinning. Top one's not. They are now. No RGB over there. It's all airy. What's gonna happen? Wow, that Zotac GPU looks cool. It's got like waves on it. Yeah, that's really quite impressive actually. I don't even think the lack of RGB on the RAM makes any difference. I think it's very well themed. Are we gonna get a display though? That's the question. Hang on a minute. That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, our RTX 4080 PC is alive. We're in Windows, so give me a few minutes to get everything set up. We'll get some games installed and we'll show you exactly how this thing performs. And I believe we are all set up and ready to go. And I just mean, look at this system. It is absolutely beautiful. Can you see why I'm going on about this chassis like all of the time? Yes, the airflow version is going to have better airflow, but the visuals of this just can't be beat. It's something that doesn't always come across properly on camera with all of those reflections, but I assure you, in real life, in 3D, this thing looks the business. But should we actually check out its performance? Let's start out with some Cyberpunk. We'll run this at Ray Tracing Ultra, DLSS and DLSS frame generation. And just look at that, 100 frames a second in the heart of the city, and it looks and feels absolutely incredible. In terms of latency, we are getting a little bit higher. If you turn frame generation on, we're getting about 55 milliseconds, but this isn't something that's really gonna bother anybody, to be honest. Yes, if you wanna play a multiplayer title, then something like frame generation probably isn't the technique you're going to want to use. To show the difference, we go into the settings and turn frame generation off, hit apply, and you'll see our frame rate will immediately decrease to around about 60, 63 FPS. But the way the game feels actually does improve slightly. It's a bit of a weird one because it doesn't look as smooth, yet it kind of feels slightly smoother. There's not really too much to it, to be honest. I actually personally would rather leave frame generation on. I think the overall image and the balance of everything is better. But as I say, if you care about latency, you can see it's dropped down to about 40-ish milliseconds of latency. So it's slightly more responsive if you're doing like a gun trial or something. But for most people, frame generation is the way you're going to want to play. Turning it down to 1440p, you can now see we're getting around about 100 FPS completely natively, which is pretty cool. Our PC latency is around about 40 or so. I think a lot of us are going to be playing this game on a 1440p display, so this is actually probably more relevant to a lot of people than 4K. But if you want to see these numbers with frame generation, we'll turn that on. You can see we're now getting about 155 frames a second, pretty much just below max settings in Cyberpunk with all of the bells and whistles. That is pretty tasty. Let us try a new game though that Nvidia has helpfully supplied a code for, some Loopmancer. This is actually a 3D side-scroller look, and you can see we've got all of the Nvidia ray tracing goodness here. So as you move along, you can see you've got all of these lovely real-time reflections. It looks pretty nice actually, I have to say. And this is actually another title that does support DLSS 3.0 frame generation. And at the moment we're getting around about 120 frames a second or so, and this feels very smooth, very responsive, and it looks pretty fabulous, I have to say. But let's use this very heavy scene to demonstrate the DLSS frame generation. At the moment, 20 to 24 milliseconds of latency, and you'll see our frame rate has now increased by around about 20 or so frames a second. It's not actually as huge as I would have imagined here. Maybe there's some sort of other bottleneck in the system that's reducing it. You can see potentially up to double the FPS with frame generation. Here, as I say, we're getting about 20. In terms of milliseconds of latency, it's adding about an extra 10 as well, which in a game like this, especially if you are going to use a controller, you're almost certainly not going to notice. But let's move on to some multiplayer titles now, starting with some Overwatch 2. And indeed, here we are, running at 4K, epic settings, everything turned up to max with AMD's FSR enabled, and we're getting 167 FPS at 4K. That is not too shabby. Though, to be honest, I'm not really sure how many people are going to be playing Overwatch at 4K. If you can get the latency low enough, then I suppose it doesn't really matter because we're getting around about 12 milliseconds or so at the moment, which is pretty cool. But most people will probably play at 1440p or, I would say ultra-wide, but is that even supported in Overwatch? It wasn't before. And indeed, turning it down to 1440p yields much, much higher results. Remembering this is max settings, epic, we're getting about 200 to 250 FPS depending on where and when we are in the game. I think most people probably want to play this at high, to be honest. I mean, does it really matter how good Overwatch looks? It's all about the way it responds. Ultimately, for me, it's all about maximizing your monitor's FPS and making sure you can see every frame available. If you want to see some RTX 4080 Apex Legends numbers, by the way, I've actually already tested this on the Intel platform with the 4080. You can find that video in the top right corner of your screen. But for now, let's jump into some Warzone. And here we go, jumping out of the plane, 4K max settings, DLSS to quality, and our FPS is around about 120 FPS or so. And I'm not sure what my memory is doing, but I swear we got higher than this on our Intel system. Is something the matter? Is this like a CPU bound scenario? Is this a driver thing? I'm not entirely sure, but I swear we should be getting more than 100 FPS. And I know that there have actually been a few issues with very early BIOSes on some of these boards, with the latest faulty series of GPUs, so that could actually be causing us an issue here. I'm not entirely sure. We have got the Expo profile on the RAM, so we are running at 6000 megahertz, but I don't know. I think I was expecting slightly more. Go and check out that Intel video because we've also got some more Warzone figures in there that will help you to sort of show you the differences. What is going on? Why is it doing this? Why does it not like Warzone? 20 FPS now. I honestly don't know what's going on. I think Warzone is just bugged. Maybe I need to reinstall it. Something specifically about this game with this SSD and this computer has gone wrong. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I want to have the answers. I'm sorry, I'm a failure. But let's move on to the title that you guys have been asking for the most, and I'm sorry I've neglected it, some Fortnite. And we are indeed on the floor, getting around about 135 frames a second, but this is at 4K with DLSS, everything set to epic, but ray tracing is disabled because this is a multiplayer title, and personally speaking, I don't really think it's going to be worth it for like 99% of people, especially if you're playing competitively. But it still looks really good, especially at this 4K resolution. Again, it's probably not the settings I would choose. I would either go for 4K with DLSS set to balanced or something, or just play this at 1440p to get an even higher frame rate. But don't get me wrong, 4K, 120 FPS is certainly nothing to be sniffed at. Pretty impressive, really. But when, of course, we do turn this down to 1440p, you can see some big gains. We're looking around about 180, 190 FPS now, which for me, I think is going to be a whole lot more competitive. The only thing I'll say is that compared to like the 3090, if you've sort of got one of these already, you're not going to see huge differences, but that's not really the logical upgrade path. If you just want a super powerful GPU that can pretty much do anything, then clearly the 4080 is going to be a very good bet. I mean, almost 200 FPS at epic preset. That is not too shabby at all. So there we are then. Pretty much everything I think you need to know about this system. What do you make of it? What do you like? What do you dislike? Personally speaking, I know I sound a bit like a broken record at this point, but I absolutely love the look of this. I think it's fantastic. Airflow though is going to be more important for a lot of people, especially when you're pairing it with really high-end components. While we haven't seen any issues with thermals or anything like that, obviously better airflow is always better. So if you want to go down that route, obviously that's absolutely fine. It's more the question of the 4080 and then the choice of platform. And I think AMD makes a whole lot of sense if you do want to go for a next generation motherboard anyway, with things like DDR5 support, and you are going to grab like PCI Gen 5 and all of the extra AMD features. But obviously if you do want to save yourself some money, keep DDR4 support, and in some ways just get slightly better value, then it does look like Intel is going to be a slightly better bet. And if you want the most powerful CPU for gaming as well, it does look like the i9 slightly edges out the Ryzen CPUs. I don't know, if it was me, I would want to have all of the information, and we won't get that till we see the benchmarks from the AMD cards. But ultimately, if you want loads of performance and you don't want to spend 4090 money, the 4080 does make a whole lot of sense. If you do want to learn more about absolutely anything inside this system, then as always, you can find this link down below with my Amazon affiliate links. But absolutely smash the like button if you've enjoyed this video, get yourself subscribed, and I'll see you after a short word from this video's sponsor. I have to admit, I had a brilliant time building this, but building my own website from scratch a few years ago, not quite so much. Fortunately, there is a service out there that lets you create a beautiful professional website in literally just minutes, Squarespace. Connect with your audience and generate revenue through gated members-only content, manage your members, send email communications and leverage audience insights, all on one easy-to-use platform. You can also create a community on your Squarespace website with a fully integrated commenting system and powerful blogging tools to categorize, share, and schedule your posts. You can now even use third-party tools thanks to Squarespace extensions, which help you to manage inventory, promote products, streamline bookkeeping, and even display social media posts automatically. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/PC Centric to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one.